This is Rion Ahl. He scored in the top 0.05% of Australia at the end of high school and has co-founded a national education company called 50 Coach. On top of that, he's worked as a business analyst and consultant, written in major newspapers, all while being a full-time med student at Monash University. I interviewed him on what it takes to succeed in high school, the tips he would have given his past self, and how he's made the most of his life after high school. Let's get started.
Hey Rion, really good to have you. Good to be here. So we'll just get straight into it. What do you think is the secret to the ATAR system?
I think it really comes down to something I call the biggest lie. The fact that a lot of students look at high performers, and I've had this happen to me and I'm sure it's happened to you. And they say this, they say, they're so talented, I wish I could understand the curriculum like them. I could study, I could do exams like them. And they attribute the success to talent. And they pedestal these people who do well. The truth is that talent is the least important thing in high school. It's important in many areas of life, music, art, and other academics. There's, other academic tests where it's a bit more important. But in high school, the vast majority of the time, there's only one metric. How many exams do you do? How often do you practice? How often do you put your head down and do the work? And if that's more than the person sitting next to you, you're going to get a better score. It has nothing to do with the level of talent. It has everything to do with your belief that you can outwork the people around you to get a better score. And so the one thing that I want to stress is that to the people who see high achievers, the people who even ask me, how could I ever get a score like you did? The truth is I sat down a whole lot, I studied a whole lot, and that was one of the biggest secrets. And in fact, the only secret to doing well.
Definitely what matters a lot is the quality of the work you put in and also the hours that you put in as well, because if you put in quite a lot of hours and you work well and efficiently, that can really help with doing.
That's right. That's exactly.
I think that leads on really well to the next question actually, which is how much did you study?
Well, I was graduating in the year of COVID, so we were all locked down and that was good for some people, bad for others. I think it was helpful for me because my plan during year 12 was always very simple. And that was that I was either going to be at school, I was going to be at one of a few social events, or I was going to be studying. And it was always one of those three things. So that did mean that especially in the lead up, and I want to be very realistic, in the lead up to the exams, say the 60 to 90 day period, I would get home, I would open the books, I'd study, I'd have dinner, I'd study, and I'd probably spend maybe an hour or two free time and go to bed. That meant 3 or 4 hours of study very consistently every day. Now I say that, acknowledging that most students aren't going to want to commit to that. And to them I say, there's that 80-20 rule, which is a classic, but it's so true. 80% of that score will come from 20% of the effort. And it's about every incremental hour of effort that you put in, getting you a score that may be a benefit that's a little less each time, but stacks up, especially if you're looking to achieve really, really high.
You mentioned that COVID was the year that we graduated as well. So what do you think was one of the biggest challenges that you faced?
I really faced two massive challenges in year 12, and I'll take a second to tell you those two stories. Number one was that I actually did English 3 and 4 without having done the unit 1 and 2. And that's because I tried English language, didn't do well in it, had to drop to English literature. I did that for unit 2. Again, tried to do well in it. I couldn't get the hang of it. And that's okay. So I had to end up dropping out of that. And I entered the subject of VC English, having not done the unit 1 and 2. So the first biggest challenge was sitting there with a cohort of kids who had obviously done the 1 and 2, who were very talented, having not studied English in a whole year and having to remember the structures in that holiday period. It can be done if you really hone in on making sure that you put the effort to just become on top, even if you come from a place that's far behind. The second challenge that I had was at about 2-3 weeks before my English exam, I got my practice exam results, just like many students are getting, at this point in the year or around this point later in the year. On one of those assessments, I got a score which was much lower than expected. It was probably about a 6 or 10 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. For some students, that's a great score. For some students, that's what they expect. For me, I was really hoping to get a very high English score. It wasn't what I needed. It was very challenging to see that terrible score and to think, well, I've got 2 weeks. I need to somehow get better in that amount.
So that leads on to a pretty good point, which is how do you recover from a result that's less than ideal?
Probably the biggest determinant if you're going to do well in year 12. And it's that there are two students, really. Number one, who is able to see a bad score and get very bogged down in it, and in essence give up on that subject for the rest of the year. And you see that in the people who say, I'm not going to put effort into my exam, it's not going to be my top 4, and as a result they cave and they give up on that subject. And then you have student number 2 who understands that you fail a SAC or you do badly on a SAC and you still got 4 or 5 or 6 SACs to come and an exam. I've seen rank 11s, as you have, who have got raw 50s. I've seen rank 1s who have got a middle of the cohort score. The truth is that it comes down to understanding that one assessment matters, but the whole subject determines your score.
I think that leads us on to talk a little bit about rankings and SACs. And people always talk about how the school you go to really matters, or whether it doesn't matter, and how well your cohort does. So how do you think the schools that you went to actually influenced your ability to score well? If so, do you have any advice for people who might be going to schools that maybe don't have the resources that other schools do?
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Emil. The truth is that there's an unequal system in year 12. Between public schools, between private schools, between rural and metro, between a school in one locale and a school in another locale. I've experienced public schools, I've experienced private schools, and I can tell you that the truth is that private schools have more resources. They have teachers who can understand the exams in a slightly better manner because they maybe even mark those exams.
Thanks, Rion. I think that's definitely really true. And I guess now we can kind of talk a little bit about how you prepared for exams and how you actually studied in year 12.
Well, I always focused on being very formulaic, and I think that that's really one of the keys to doing well in year 12, which is that unfortunately it is a bit of a formula. It's got a predetermined path, and you, of course, teach a lot of the students that there's a way to study and a smart way to do it. And if you do that, you're halfway along the journey to doing well yourself. For me, that basically meant figuring out what I was going to study and when I was going to study it and how I was going to study it before I did the study. So for example, I built a schedule system which encompassed the last 7 days of my schooling. And I wrote down what exam I would do on each of those days, what practice I would do on each of those days, whether I would write English essay, whether I had a SAC, and how I would frame all of my study. And what that meant was that by the time that day came along, I wasn't spending the morning figuring out what I was going to do. I was spending the morning doing it. So you front load the effort and the time into how you study at the beginning before you start that study period. And the second thing is that I always made sure that I emulated the environment. If you've got an exam or a SAC, you know what your school desks look like. You probably know what your exam hall looks like. Put your pens off to the side, put your ID card in the right place, print out the exam booklets and do them by hand. Don't just write answers in your textbook. And if you do these things, you're preparing yourself mentally and making sure that you're not just studying, you're doing it smartly.
I think that's very true. And controlling your environment is definitely one of the most important study tips I think that any student can take. That's because controlling your environment is what allows you to stay focused for long periods of time, stop yourself from getting distracted, and also, as you said, it really prepares you for the assessment setting that you'll end up being in.
That's right, it's simple and not enough students do it.
I think with that said as well, do you have any specific tips for what students can do to prepare for their exams or assessments?
Yeah, well, I say that there's really two halves. One is English and one is all your other subjects. Because for all your other subjects, it's about the practice exams. It's about doing them and doing them smart. And what doing them smart means is you don't mark them yourself because you're going to give yourself a higher mark than someone else is going to. You get your friends, you get your teachers, you get your family to mark them. You even get maybe alumni, someone who got a high score from the year above. I paid someone a few dollars per exam who had gotten a very high score from a few years above to mark my exams for me, just to make sure I had that objective grading of myself and my ability. So it's about doing the exam smart. And for English, it's about doing tasks. So you don't sit down and you don't do a 3-hour long English essay. It's not sustainable to do that. For English, it's either you're memorizing 50 quotes, or you're writing out 5 plans, or you're improving your introductions, or you're writing a section A or B or C. You don't have to do the full exams for English, but you have to focus on the individual constituent skills, because that's what's going to be what you take with you into the English exam when you don't know what's going to come up on the day.
I think those are some really good points, especially the one about practice exams, because I think firstly, practice exams are probably a bit underutilized by students because they really help you understand what it is that the assessors are looking for. And I think on that point, it is very true that often if you mark a practice exam yourself, you're very likely to tell yourself, oh, I knew that already, or oh, maybe I would have got that on another day, or that question's just silly, and make excuses for yourself. But I think if you get someone else to mark your questions, or you get a teacher to do it and give you some advice, that definitely helps a lot with honing in your skills for the exam. So Rion, as we know, you run a tutoring company. I wonder, do you think you see many benefits for the students that you tutor, and do you think that students need tutoring, or who do you think should get it?
I'll go against the grain here as someone who runs a tutoring company. I think the easy answer is everyone should go and do tutoring, right? That's what you probably expect me to say, but I don't think that's actually the case. I think that you have to have a degree of want and a degree of desire to do well to get anything from tutoring. So I have students, lots of students at 50 Coach, and some of them I think definitely need to be there to get something out of it. And there's always the minority that aren't. And that minority is there because their parents are making them do the tutoring. They don't believe in doing well in year 12. They're there for some other reason than themselves feeling that they need to do well. And so the message I give is this. People say the ATAR doesn't matter. It's fair enough. It's true in many respects. The ATAR, it doesn't matter if you don't want to go to university. It doesn't matter if you want to get in with a different pathway. That's true. That's fair enough. But at the very minimum, the ATAR is a marker of your performance over 12 years of high school. At the very least, it's something you put effort into in your final year to feel like this is what I was able to do when I put my mind to a task. And so I say to all my students, if you want to do tutoring and if you want to get something out of tutoring, you only do it if you feel like you want to do well. You only will get something out of it if you believe that you deserve to get a good ATAR and that you can get a good ATAR. And the way to do that is by actually wanting to be there. So if you, again, do tutoring, if you have a desire to do well and you actually want to be there, because if you just try and sit in the classroom and learn from a tutor, it will be just as ineffective as sitting at school and trying to learn from a teacher.
We've talked a lot about year 12 so far, but what about life after year 12? How have you found that?
Well, I think I've actually had the goal, and this will be surprising to your audience, but I've had this goal since year 12, which is to make my ATAR the least interesting and least important part about. And I actually think this is probably something that everyone will some extent agree with, right? They want to put it in the past, and eventually it doesn't matter as much when you go into university. Now I run a tutoring company, so again, that's harder for me, but it's still been my goal. And so ultimately, I think this is the message, and this has been my personal message. You can never peak in high school. You can never let that be what happens to you. And so if you do well in year 12, that is only further reason to make sure you do well beyond year 12. Because if you don't, then unfortunately, all you were really putting effort towards was your ability to rote learn and to study and to learn these techniques, which are important, but they're probably a very small part of the overall puzzle of life, which involves communicating with people, learning from people, actually having the humility to understand that year 12 means you still know nothing, and that there's a big world that you've graduated into as an adult and now have to take the reins and find your own path. So for me, that's involved getting experiences that I never would have thought possible. It means meeting people who I never would have thought would take a meeting with me. And it means doing things that I never thought I would ever be able to do. And I think that's the beauty of it. You have to believe you can, you have to want to do it again. And if those two things are true, then you'll have an amazing life post year 12.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And life definitely doesn't end after year 12, which is obvious, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And I think it can be really good to continue building on the skills that you build in year 12 and taking that momentum as you continue into whatever you do after high school.
Well, I remember the day that I finished my final exam because it was a very sunny day. It was my economics exam, and I walked out and it just was the most beautiful feeling and bliss. And I thought, I will never have to worry about anything. Did you have this theory?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I will never have to worry about anything ever again. It's all over. It turns out it's not. But surprisingly, that's not a bad thing. Because the second you lose things to do, the second your life will become a bit more boring, and you'll find that you'll want those things to do. I think that's really important.
And do you think that everyone should be aiming for the best marks that they possibly can?
I think I get into a lot of trouble here because I often get asked the question, do you think that everyone should be aiming for a perfect score, for 10 out of 10? And the sentence is always, yes, of course, we should aim to be perfect. But I've always been realist. There are some students sitting a subject who don't want to do well in the subject, who don't perhaps like the subject and who don't care for a perfect score. And so I want to be very realistic. If you want to improve in a subject and you're sitting at a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10, I'm not going to be telling you, let's get you to a 10 out of 10. I'm going to be telling you, and I'm telling every student, improve by 2 to 3 to 4 points. It's realistic. It can be done easily. It's not disheartening. I mean, what's more disheartening than telling a student who has got a 3 out of 10 that they're going to be a perfect scorer within a few weeks? It's all about being realistic, looking at where you are now and saying, I can do a whole lot better without feeling the pressure to be perfect, because not everyone has to be perfect.
I think that's a really good point. And often it's those small incremental improvements that eventually get you up to the place where, if you do want to, you could actually aim for that 10 out of 10 or the perfect score, because everyone really starts at a certain point, and the only way to get to whatever you want is by making small steps to get there.
That's exactly right.
If you had to give one piece of advice to your year 12 self, what would it be?
That's an excellent question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one before, actually. If I was going to give one piece of advice to my year 12 self, it would probably be to basically understand that year 12 is very important at that moment, which is what I knew, but that it is equally important to make sure that the people with you in year 12 stay with you post high school. And we lose track of that. And in my year, the lockdown year, people lost track of that even more. Some of my closest friends now are my high school friends. They're people who you spend time building a relationship with before you even get to university. And they're people who've shared a lot of life's journeys and a lot of the most important moments in your life with. This is the one piece of advice I'd give myself and any other year 12. Make sure you hang on to those people. Make sure you stay connected to them, because at the end of the day, you can achieve a lot of things and be very happy, but you can't achieve a lot of things and be very happy if you don't have anyone to share those things.
Yeah, that's very true and very profound, Rion. Thank you. I kind of agree with exactly the same thing. I think it's really important to make sure that you keep up with your extracurriculars and all of those things that you enjoy throughout year 12. Even if you feel like things are getting stressful or you don't have enough time or you need more time to study, yeah, it's so important to keep those things up, because those are what give you a depth of character and help you build friendships and connections that actually last over long periods of time.
That's right. And I don't want to be stereotypical and tell you and then tell the audience, well, no, I want you to continue all of your extracurriculars and all of your sporting and all of your music and all of this and that. The truth is, you're going to have to cut down. You're going to have to sacrifice in year 12, but you don't have to cut down everything. Cut down what you can, you keep what you need, and you're going to have a good year.
Just as we finish up, is there any message that you'd like to share with the world?
I think it's the one message that I've learned post year 12, which I think has just been something that's helped me do everything that I've done post year 12. And it's that you cannot give up. And that sounds very stereotypical. It really does. But it's something people need to hear. I get told no far more than I get told yes. I've been rejected from many more meetings. I've been rejected from many opportunities, many times more than I have been successful. And the things that you see on my profile and on my website or this or that, this is the cream of the crop. This is the success. But this is a very small sliver of all of the effort that's put into all the various things that I did. Now, the only reason I've been able to show off that sort of thing is because of the 90% of half-baked or even completely failed projects and ideas and things that I've tried to do. Everyone says don't give up. What they don't say is if you give up, you'll never achieve, because giving up subjects you to settling for the 90% and losing that top 10%. And so it's stereotypical, but it's true. If you put that effort in, you keep going and hammering, eventually you're going to win, and eventually you're going to find what you want to do. And that's the true gift.
That's very profound, Rion. And thanks a lot for coming on the channel and having a chat with me.
It's been a pleasure, and it's a brilliant thing to see what you're doing and how you're helping all of these students. You're sharing a lot of good tips. You're sharing stuff that people need to know. I really hope you can continue to keep doing that.
If people want to find you, where can they?
Well, the easiest way is to shoot me a message on my website, rionahl.com. But otherwise, if you just want to reach out on socials or by email on my website, that's perfectly fine. I'm more than happy to chat and hear what you have to say.